Hey everyone, and welcome. My name is Joe Brady, and I'm just here to host things today. We have a special guest that's going to take us through camera calibration and the benefits of creating camera profiles. Our guest today is the X-Rite Coloratti member Falcon. Originally from Connecticut, he now makes his home and his studio in Greensboro, North Carolina. His studio is a collaborative effort. There's multiple photographers there who have a commitment to manage color and consistent results, and they take the craft of photography very seriously. As a quote from the Color Story page of Falcon's website, he says, "Photography is as much about control and consistency as it is about artistic vision and insight." So again, Falcon is a member of the X-Rite Coloratti. He's also a DxO Lab Image Master. We're happy to have him with us here today. Falcon, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to today.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you. Okay, why color management? Because what you see is not what you get. In the digital world, we operate under the assumption that because it's digital, it must be correct, when in fact that is not the case. From the cameras we use to LCDs and LEDs, every single one of them is different. And even though they come through the factory at the same time, there's no guarantee that the calibration will be correct or that blue will be blue across each and every one of those devices. We define a photograph as a visual invitation to an emotional experience. Emotion is a function of detail, color, texture, contrast, and the sense of space in the image. Emotion is a function of a repeatable, consistent workflow that also gives us the ability to couple artistic vision with the emotion of the moment. The elements of a workflow include a repeatable and repeated process, accurate data, and a consistent, stable working environment. This is an example of what a piece of ours looks like. Again, the emphasis is on repeatability at every point so that we make sure that our work has a standard look and feel, as well as to make sure that the accuracy of the color is maintained all the way through. So whatever you do, always do it the same way. End-to-end color management is a critical component of a stable, accurate, and consistent workflow. And by end-to-end here we mean from the camera all the way through to the finished product, whether that is a digital image that we turn over to a client or a print that we make. Okay, why work in RAW? This is a continuing conversation that's certainly gone on for the 11 years that I've been in photography. RAW is essentially everything that the sensor in your camera sees. So if it's a 20 megapixel camera, it's all 20 megapixels. A JPEG, by comparison, is a compressed file format, and as a result, while the images are substantially smaller and you can get more on a memory card, there is up to an 80% loss in information, which the sensor originally captured. So, understanding the difference between RAW and JPEG, if you go with JPEG out of the camera, you are giving up a substantial amount of information. That's absolutely critical, not just for maintaining the clarity of the image itself, but also, as you'll see here, for developing color profiles that help you maintain end-to-end color consistency. See all you can see, work in RAW. So if you do the math, a 20 megapixel camera produces a 4 megapixel image when it is saved as a JPEG. That's a substantial loss of information. In addition to that, there are other issues that are common with JPEGs. Noise is one. If you zoom into a black area and you see red and green pixels, that's noise. If you look in the sky and there are dots along the way that are miscolored, that's another example of noise. You have fewer post-processing options. Correcting white balance, for example, is considerably more difficult and much less successful on a JPEG than it is on a RAW image. And one of the points that few people realize is every time you open a JPEG, whether you're going to edit it or not, there is a loss of detail, a loss of data, because of the compression algorithm that's used to create the JPEG. So getting the correct exposure, in this slide you see a ColorChecker Passport in an actual scene from a shoot about a month ago. Accurate color is a function of proper exposure. Getting the light correct first is absolutely critical. Then and only then can you be assured that the calibration that you'll be getting will be accurate. So, the basics. What are the lighting or color challenges you face? Place the passport prominently in the image. Think ahead. How will you use these images in post-processing? Placing the passport prominently in the image is very important because it saves you time later while you can manually adjust and find the color passport. We found that placing it prominently in the image not only saves time, but ultimately renders a much more accurate profile. It isn't about what's right or wrong, it's about what works. So we urge you to find a methodology, employ it consistently to get the exposure correct at the beginning of every shoot. Getting the full dynamic range of color is a function of proper exposure, and obviously proper exposure is a function of properly lighting the scene. Okay, DNG, digital negative, is an open, lossless, raw image format which was written by Adobe, and it was launched in September of 2004. What to do if your camera supports DNG as a native format, and what to do if your camera does not. We have used the Pentax 645D extensively, and in the menu system under RAW we have the option of saving in the proprietary Pentax format or as a native DNG. It would be preferable if your camera supports it and you're going to create a color profile to make sure that the images are saved as a DNG. If your camera doesn't support DNG, you will need to process the raw images you will use to create profiles as DNGs. You don't need to process all of your raw images, just the ones from which you will be creating the color profile. Use your RAW converter's default settings. This is critical. If you change the raw image in any way, whether it's white balance or sharpness or aberration, the Color Passport Checker software will not recognize the image as accurate and be able to render a profile effectively. So again, leave the image as it was, simply process it, save it as a DNG. Most RAW converters support output as a DNG format. Okay, using the ColorChecker Passport. As you'll see momentarily when we look at a screenshot of the profile software, we have two options, a single illuminant or a dual illuminant. The single illuminant uses a single DNG image to produce a single DNG profile that represents a single lighting condition. A dual illuminant profile will produce a single DNG profile that represents two different lighting situations. It's important here to note that if the two images you use to create a dual illuminant profile are very close in terms of their overall color checker, the software will not render a profile because the images are obviously virtually identical. So typically, as you'll see, we will create a dual profile using two very different images from two very different rooms in a house. So which one should you use? It really depends on the lighting situation. It depends also on what you want to be able to capture and what your color problems are in the particular scene. So A dual illuminant profile interpolates between the two images based on the white balance setting. So if one of your images is at 3200 degrees Kelvin and your other image is at 8500 degrees Kelvin, it will essentially interpolate all the information between those two Kelvin settings. A dual illuminant profile offers improved color reproduction over a wider range of scenes. The degree of improvement also depends on the camera model. Some cameras have a more sophisticated white balance mechanism, others are not quite as sophisticated, so the accuracy and robustness of the profile will vary with the camera. It's not the light temperature that matters, rather it is the spectrum of illumination in the scene. So more than just the light temperature, it's the full spectrum of illumination in the scene that will determine how accurate and how robust the profile will ultimately be. If you photograph under unusual artificial lighting, often consider building a profile for each situation. As you'll see when we look at the Profile Manager, you can keep a wide range of profiles for a very different number of lighting conditions. We've amassed quite a collection over the last few years, so when we're working on our images, we can provide a very precise degree of profiling that we would otherwise not be able to. Examples: a single DNG image would be great for a section of a room or a scene in a studio where you have absolute control of your lighting. A dual image DNG created for a series of rooms in a house would be much more effective than creating one image for each. It allows you a latitude to compensate for very different lighting situations when you're out in the field working on location. So this is the interface. It's very straightforward, very easy to use. You simply drag and drop the DNG images directly into it. In this case, I dropped one in from the Pentax 645D. The software automatically recognized the ColorChecker Passport, and was able to isolate it. If I needed to, the controls on the left would allow me to zero in on the ColorChecker Passport and isolate that section of the color palette that's critical for creating the color profile. In this case, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there are two photographs. One is the ColorChecker Passport on a tapestry pillow. The other one is with the ColorChecker Passport sitting on top of a credenza in a completely different room of the house. When you click on each of the photographs in the dual illuminant DNG section, the ColorChecker Passport is automatically isolated. If it cannot find the ColorChecker Passport, you will be notified and you will be given the opportunity to manually locate it. We have found the location software within the ColorChecker Passport profile suite to be extremely powerful. And if you look down where my mouse is now pointing, that one, which is being shown on the screen, was not even straight and square. We deliberately set it on an angle to prove the point. Once you click on Create Profile, you're given the opportunity to name each profile. In a minute, we'll be talking about naming conventions and naming convention consistency. If you use Windows, as we do, each of the profiles is stored under Application Data, Roaming, Adobe, Camera RAW, and Camera Profiles. When you open Camera RAW, each of these profiles, as you'll see, is immediately available. One note to be made here: if you create a profile while Camera RAW is open, it will not recognize it. You would have to exit Camera RAW and go back in. Okay, once you click on Create Profile, as the next slide shows you, the software tells you that it is saving the profile. And it is literally that easy. We have used a number of different profile generators over the past 5 years, and this by far is the easiest to use. Okay, let's talk about managing profiles. The DNG Profile Manager, which can also be downloaded directly from X-Rite, is a very easy tool and very effective tool to use. We're going to talk about 3 very specific areas of the Profile Manager next. So, if you are, like we are, owners of multiple cameras, we have a 1DS Mark II, Mark III, a 1DX, we have a Fuji, etc., etc. We can sort by each of the profiles for each of the cameras that we have stored on our production machines. In this case, for test purposes, all of these profiles were created for the 1DS Mark III. As the second area, Illuminant 1 and Illuminant 2, shows you, where appropriate, both light sources are provided for you. Note that under the first one, under Illuminant 1, it says Cool White Fluorescent. The next one down, which is a dual profile, that is, it was made from 2 images, shows D55 as Illuminant 1 and Cool White Fluorescent for the second. Notice in panel 3, I have the ability to enable and disable profiles. When I disable a profile here, they are not visible in Camera RAW. Okay. Using Profile Manager. Profile Manager makes keeping up with profiles you create extremely easy. And it's a great way to make sure each computer you use has a full set of profiles. In our operation, we have 6 production machines, and with Profile Manager, we're able to make sure that everyone has the same profiles. Let's talk about naming consistency, and why it's important. We've found over the years, particularly given the fact that there are more than one photographer, there's more than one photographer in our firm, that naming consistency is absolutely critical if you're going to find anything. And even if you're working alone, we strongly recommend that you develop, use, and maintain a consistent way of naming each of your color profiles. So this is how we do it. We have the camera model plus the word dual, if in fact it is a dual profile, plus the situation or environment for which it was created. Example, 1DS M3, a 1DS Mark III, -dual, -blue interior. Okay, let's talk about using DNG profiles and Adobe Camera RAW. If you're familiar with Adobe Camera RAW, this is how the interface looks. And this is how we will apply the profiles that we've created with the ColorChecker Passport. On the right side of the Camera RAW screen, the camera icon, you will click there. Then under Camera Profile, you'll click on the down arrow. This, by the way, was created with CS6, so there may be some variations with earlier forms of Camera RAW. And C shows you all of the profiles that were created using the ColorChecker Passport. Very simple. You identify them, you click on the ones that you wish, and they are applied. Okay, let's talk about using them in Bridge. In doing our research for this webinar, there have been a vast number of changes that have occurred to Bridge since it was first introduced back, I believe, with CS3, if not earlier. And in CS3, there was a place where you could indicate how to apply color profiles under Edit Preferences. That is now gone. In CS6 and later forms of Bridge, as the arrow here indicates, you click on the icon that looks almost like arrows in a circle, and that will automatically start Camera RAW. Obviously, at that point, you want to have highlighted one or more images that you wish to work with. You'll notice that here there's a red rectangle. I've set it for the amber selection around a raw image, and that would be automatically opened in Camera RAW. At that point, we're back at the previous slide, which I'll return to. And again, you click on the camera icon, click on the camera profile, and apply the color profile. Okay, let's review. We had a very interesting situation occur about 2 weeks ago. We had done a headshot for a local real estate agent, and I got a call at 10 o'clock at night. She said that she looked very orange on her screen. Would I restore her complexion? Interestingly enough, her printer had gotten the same image from us, and when she saw the printed version, it was absolutely perfect. So one of the problems we continue to manage in the digital world is the consistency of color across multiple devices. Rather than reduce that problem over time, we've seen it become more pronounced and more difficult. So end-to-end color management is an even more critical problem now, and will continue to be more critical as the number of devices on which our work is displayed continues to grow over the next few years. Consistency in workflow is also extremely important. We do a lot of seminars for photographers, amateur, semi-pro, and pro. And I would say that one of the most common problems we have, or that we address in our seminars, is a lack of consistency in workflow. Whether it's the interaction with your camera, preparation for a shoot, the naming of images, the development of color profiles, it's absolutely critical in every situation that you maintain a consistent workflow. B, color is critical for conveying emotion. Humans are visual creatures. Our visual imagery input shapes our emotional experience of the world. If your colors are not accurate, you will not create powerful images that evoke an emotional response across all the viewers who look at it. And again, if you define, as we do, a photograph as a visual invitation to an emotional experience, it's absolutely critical that you maintain and control the accuracy of color. And finally, using the right tools. There's no substitute for the proper tool for the proper task. And we hope we've convinced you that using the X-Rite ColorChecker Passport and supporting software will help you maintain and develop a portfolio of color profiles that will address your needs as photographers. If you would like to contact me, if you're interested in a copy of this presentation, this is my email address. Also, for participants in this webinar, we have a free offer. If you go to nightvision.com, our online magazine, you can have a free premium subscription. We publish it 4 times a year. There's a lot of technical information as well as photo essays in the magazine. And finally, if you are interested in seminars with us, you can go to seminars.nightfalcon.com, and I guess we do have time for questions.
Yes, we do, Falcon. Thank you. I've been trying to answer questions furiously in the background. A couple people had a question about why would you elect to create a dual profile as opposed to creating a separate custom profile for each lighting situation.
Okay. You cannot actually do either. Our preference when we're working particularly on site, we do a lot of architectural photography, is to do a dual, because we can capture a wider range of color across a wider range of circumstances very quickly. If it's a very unusual circumstance, for example, we were working in a classroom at a local university, the lights in the room were particularly skewed toward the cool end of the spectrum, we elected to make a very particular profile for that room to accurately get the white balance and color balance that we needed. Again, no hard and fast rule. It's a question of your workflow and how you address color profiling.
All right, there's a couple folks that are confused about Lightroom. You showed the ColorChecker utility. Just for those of you that are Lightroom people, there's a plugin, and it's simply you just bring up the picture of the ColorChecker Passport and choose File, Export with Preset, ColorChecker Passport, and it automatically creates the profile. Do understand that if you create a profile in the ColorChecker utility or in Lightroom, both Photoshop and Lightroom see it. So no worries there. Now, you mentioned DNG a couple of times, Falcon. Can you just explain that, what's going on there with the DNG?
Sure. When Adobe created the DNG RAW format in 2007, the idea was to create a universal RAW file format that all manufacturers, if they wished, could adhere to. The advantage of a DNG is that it is transportable and universally recognized across any camera format. Now, obviously, if you are, like we are, still a Canon shop or a Nikon shop or whatever, your camera company may still use its own proprietary format. As in the Canon case, it's a CR2. Pentax, now Ricoh, they have elected in the 645D to give you the option of saving as a DNG. By saving as a DNG, you eliminate one step in the conversion process. So, for example, go back to my 1DS Mark III. My raw images are a CR2 format. The ColorChecker Passport does not recognize that format for the creation of a color profile. So I have to take my CR2, convert it to a DNG, and then I can create my color profile from that. Did that address the concern, Joe, or was there more detail required?
It's hard to say. People are confused about DNG, but what I would add is if you're a Lightroom person, you can forget the word DNG. Forget you ever heard it. Forget Falcon even mentioned it. You don't have to convert to a DNG to create your profile. It just does it all in the background, and just don't let it concern you. The only time you have to create a file as a DNG or save a file as a DNG is if you're in Photoshop and Adobe Camera RAW and you're not using Lightroom and you want to use the ColorChecker Passport utility. Is there any difference in the file sizes between the DNG and a RAW file if you do convert?
It depends on the camera that you're using. We've seen with the Canon 1DS Mark III, the CR2 is about the same size as the finished DNG. They are not appreciably larger. And by the way, I should note here that if you're using a medium format camera like the Pentax 645D, you will not be able to create dual illuminant profiles because there is a cap on the size of the DNG that the ColorChecker Passport will read. According to X-Rite, that's about 35 meg. The DNGs from the Pentax 645D are around 50 to 52. They will work to create a single illuminant without a problem, but no, at this time, not a dual. The only advantage, again, between the DNG and the native format of the raw image you're using in your camera is the fact that the DNG is an accepted open standard, whereas your CR2 or whatever the format is in your camera is proprietary. We found, for example, in the Pentax 645D that we actually get better images, better quality images and more detail by saving as a DNG rather than a PEF. So if you have the ability in your camera to save one or the other raw format, you might want to try both to see which one actually yields the best image.
A combination of questions that's interesting. First of all, have you seen much impact on ISO affecting camera profiles? And the same question for different lenses on the same body.
The answer in both cases is yes, we have. Typically, we will use the same ISO if we create a dual illuminant in both images. So, for example, when we're using strobes, we typically are using an ISO of 160 or even 125 on the 1DS Mark III and the 1DX. If we go into a room where the client has requested ambient light and our ISO is up at 800 or 1000, we will create a separate single illuminant profile for the high ISO. We've seen less variation in lenses, though on some of the slower lenses, Canon's 24-105, for example, versus the 85 prime, ditto. We have seen some variance. Our preference, again, when we create the profiles is to match the lens and the ISO. So part of the answer to the earlier question about whether we would use one or two is dependent upon the lens we're using, the ISO we're using, and if we do switch camera bodies, obviously we'll make a change as well. We try to be as specific as we can in the creation of a profile. So the 24-105 on the 1DS Mark III versus something like the Canon 14mm prime on the 1DS Mark III.
A couple of folks are also asking about using the Passport with landscape photography, so I'll just put a plug in. If you're a landscape photographer, I'm actually doing a program on Thursday where I'm going to use the Passport and do editing in Lightroom for landscape photography. So if you want to get into that kind of depth, then join us then. Also, Falcon, let's see, there was another question that was interesting. If you have multiple bodies, but the same camera, say you have two 5D Mark IIIs, should you create a profile for each of them or use one for the same, for both of them?
Okay. In our experience, you're much better off if you create a body-specific profile. There are variances, however subtle, they can be important. So we have 3 1DS Mark IIIs. We typically will use a profile based on the serial number of each one of those camera bodies. We did not demonstrate that here, obviously, for the purposes of this demo. But yes, again, I would urge you to be as specific in the creation of these profiles as you possibly can be. They do not take long to create. The better detailed they are, the more accurate and the more satisfied you'll be with the results. If you have any questions about using the ColorChecker Passport with DxO's Optics Pro, please don't hesitate to email me. I would also urge you to get one and keep it in your camera bag. We've got one in each of our camera bags. It's an incredible tool. It makes life so much easier. One other thing before I do turn it back over to Joe to close out, make sure that you keep your camera set to auto white balance when you do this. Your results will be much more accurate than if you allow the camera to set the white balance for you. I'm done, Joe. Thank you so much for your time today.
Falcon, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you guys for all the great questions. Any of your questions about Falcon subscription, etc., links to his website, to his seminars, to the e-zine, as well as the special offers from X-Rite. Stay tuned. We'll send that email out as soon as possible, along with a link to the recording, and you'll have all of that in front of you, along with a link to Thursday's Lightroom landscape photography and printing webinar. So that's it for today. Until next time, thank you guys for joining us. Hope to see you online again soon. Until then, be well. Bye-bye.